right back.
The biggest band in the world, the Beatles, were packaged by a gay manager. So the queer influence on pop music is extraordinary. And indeed, historically was a place where LGBTQ people could find a home, could actually occupy themselves without being fired or without bigotry, and also get some money and get some affirmation. So it goes right through. So it is incredibly important.
By the mid-70s, England was on the brink of a cultural shift. The decline of industry, the lingering effects of post-war austerity, and growing disillusionment created a climate ripe for anarchy. It was in this unrest that punk emerged, raw, rebellious, and defiant, offering a powerful response to a society desperate for transformation. Fanzines like Sniffing Glue were key in documenting and driving the conversation. Music, design, and youth culture collided in new, groundbreaking ways, and magazines like Sounds and Melody Maker didn't just report on the scene, they shaped it. Voices such as Caroline Coon, Linda Sterling, Barney Bubbles, and Paul Morley pushed the boundaries of music, fashion, and graphic design in new, unconventional ways. But they didn't just witness the change, they were at the forefront defining it, carving out a space where rebellion and self-expression would forever alter popular culture. In episode 11, we delve into the life of someone whose passion for music and cultural criticism has defined their entire career, and who continues to unearth the hidden treasures buried deep in the underground. My name is Richard Smith. I'm an art director and a filmmaker, and I'm your host. Welcome to Destroy.
They are punk rockers.
Raw, outrageous and crude.
The new craze, they tell me.
More into chaos than anything else.
People really don't understand what kids want.
Worthless, nasty.
They're a hero.
Welcome to Destroy, a podcast about how the punk movement of 1976 spawned a cultural revolution still being felt today.
You have to destroy in order to create.
Destroy is produced by Be Right Back Studios. Visit berightbackstudios.com/destroy to learn more. If you're enjoying the show, visit our website, destroypunkpodcast.com, to learn more about every episode, including interview transcripts, show notes, music videos, curated playlists, and more. Thank you for listening. Few people have championed the merits of youth culture more than my guest today. Upon graduating from Cambridge University, he published his first fanzine, London's Outrage, in 1976, which landed him his first job at the music magazine Sounds, much to his parents' dismay. He's written definitive histories of punk, guides to the evolution of teenagers, and his most recent book, The Secret Public, defines how LGBTQ resistance has shaped popular culture. He's also written for The Observer, The New Statesman, and Mojo, and is someone who is not afraid to speak his mind. I'm very grateful he made time to be here today. Please welcome to the show, Jon Savage. Jon, thank you. It's an honor to have you on.
Hi, yes.
By the way, are you still living in Wales? I saw that you had moved to Wales.
Correct, yeah, I'm still here.
Oh, that must be beautiful.
It is, except when there's a storm.
I've seen some of your pictures on Instagram. It looks very nice, I'm sure, regardless of the weather.
It is based. It's better than London.
Why did you move out of London?
Couldn't stand it anymore.
What didn't you like?
Just noise, really. Too many people. I didn't have enough money then to really buy somewhere bigger.
Let's just get going. So you've been a music journalist, a critic, an author since the early 70s, first at Sounds and then at Melody Maker. My first question was, why were you drawn to youth culture?
Well, it was the only thing that was happening. That's the main thing. It was the only thing to me that was happening when I was a young teenager. I was born in 53, and so I heard the Beatles in 63. I saw the whole 60s happen in front of my eyes. So why would I not be fascinated? And certainly when I left university and was coming out into the world, what cultural artifact told me what I needed to know. It wasn't the novelists. It wasn't Martin Amis. It wasn't poetry. It was the Ramones.
Mm-hmm.
So it's always been music.
Right.
I think some people quite like music. Other people are obsessed, and I'm one of those that are obsessed with music and always have been, really, since 1962.
Tell me about your recent book, The Secret Public, because in many ways there's not an analogy, but there's a similarity to the point I'm getting at about the influence of that community on culture, etc. Just talk to me about that and how you see it impacting the world.
Pop culture is soft power. It's hard power as politics, media, everyday news, etc. Culture is soft power. It's seeing somebody strange walking down the street. It's listening to a record that turns your head and stays with you and makes you look at the world in a different way, or it's a book, or it's a painting. Pop culture, since really 1955, the advent of rock and roll, or just before, has been incredibly important for lesbians and gays and bisexual and trans people in giving them visibility at a time when they were illegal. It was illegal to be a male homosexual, to express who you were, your sexual and emotional life, until 1967. So this was a time of great repression. And in the midst of this time of great repression, you have Little Richard. How does that work?
Right.
Little Richard self-identifies as bisexual, had a lot of gay experiences. His first hit, Tutti Frutti, has the original lyric are all about anal sex. So this is extraordinary. It goes into the American top 30 in early 56, right in the middle of the McCarthy era. So it is resistance, really. But it's couched in popular culture. It's couched in novelty. It's couched in a language that adults don't understand, but teenagers do. And so the book covers 1955, 1961, 1967, 1973, and 1978. And there are people like Andy Warhol, Johnny Ray, James Dean, Elvis, John Layton, Joe Meek, Robert Stigwood, Brian Epstein, Dusty Springfield, Janis Joplin, David Bowie, New York Dolls, Lou Reed, early disco, Sylvester, Bee Gees, etc. So there's a lot of artists in there who all have some relevance to the general topic.
The takeaway I get from the book is it's the impact on popular culture and changing maybe not necessarily opinions, but just infiltrating the mainstream, or whether it be fashion, whether it be music, whether it be design. Is that true?
I mean, the biggest band in the world will be the Beatles, were packaged by a gay manager.
Right.
So the queer influence on pop music is extraordinary. And indeed, historically was a place where LGBTQ people could find a home, could actually occupy themselves without being fired or without bigotry, and also get some money and get some affirmation. So it goes right through. So it is incredibly important.
Right. When you say resistance, what I like about that word is it has a duality to it. It's almost public resistance going against that community, and then as a community doing something. I was curious why you called it the resistance. Hey there, sorry for the interruption, but if you're enjoying the show, please leave a review or a comment. For the latest news and updates, make sure to also follow us on Instagram at Destroy Punk Podcast. Thank you, and now back to the show.
Well, because if you've got people telling you your shit from day one, to actually be yourself and to be who you are is an act of resistance, whoever it is, whether you're L, whether you're G, whether you're B, whether you're T, whether you're Q. But that in itself is an act of resistance, because you've got the overwhelming drift of society telling you not to be who you are. You know, the act of becoming who you are is an act of resistance. And these people were doing it in public. So it's incredibly brave in many ways. The book's called The Secret Public because for a long time, the existence of queer people was a secret. But at the same time, they were the public. They were just as much the public as anybody else. They had jobs, they paid their taxes, they attempted to live normal lives, but they couldn't because of society's oppression.
So what do you think are the important aspects of youth culture today? Are there any?
Well, to be honest, I'm not really up on it. I tend to focus on music. I realize there are malign influences targeting young men, which, of course, I really disapprove of, but I don't experience them because I'm not a young man. And I'm protective enough of sanity not to enter that world needlessly. So all I see is music, really. And music is and always will be a great form of communication. And the only thing I have to note really about music is it seems to be dominated by young women, which seems to be a very interesting and enjoyable state of affairs.
So what do you think about Spotify, the streaming services corporatization of music? It seems very little room for idiosyncrasy.
Except more people are releasing records than ever before. The problem is not that people don't have access to releasing records. The problem is that how do you get attention? When I started on the music press in 1977, it was very easy to get attention. All you needed was a feature in the NME or Sounds. And a new band might get a record company interest. It isn't like that anymore. That's just the way things are. I don't see it as being good or bad. It's just different. And you adapt to these circumstances in the way that they know how. I'm certainly not one of those people that keeps on saying, it was better in my day. A lot of things were worse in my day. So I think it's horses for courses. I play records, I listen to MP3s, I play CDs, and I'm afraid I do use Spotify. It's very convenient. But if I find a record that I like on Spotify, I'll buy a physical copy. I make sure to do that because that's only fair to the artist. Obviously, it is weighted against the artist. And in that respect, it's much like life in general at this moment, which is basically a massive transfer of power to the plutocrats and the millionaires. And that's right across society.
Okay, so let's jump back to the beginning then, the filth and the fury and all of that. Those moments back in 75, 76, 77 spawned a lot of offspring. Do you think all of that had a long-term impact?
I don't have an enormous amount to say about punk now. The only thing I can observe is that it has spread worldwide and people take from it what they can. And what they seem to take from it is the idea of doing things for themselves, which I think is very healthy. And that would be certainly one lesson that it would be great for people to take from punk, that you can just do it yourself. If there's something you want to say or you want to play an instrument or write, then you can just do it. Obviously, getting it out there is more difficult because the media landscape has changed so much in the last nearly 50 years. But that's an inspiring message to young people.
Do you think a lot of the characterization of punk was driven by the media?
Well, you're talking about London punk, and certainly London punk, early English punk, was an explicit engagement with the media. So, yes, it was very important. And obviously, the Grundy incident in December 76 changed the whole thing. And helped to make punk stupid, helped to promote punk, but at the same time, helped to make it a national issue. And it is always interesting when pop culture becomes a national issue, which it did, again, with Oasis and Blur. And that's one of the reasons so many people want to see Oasis again, because that was the last time that pop music was really a national issue. And very interesting things happen when pop becomes a national issue. The whole point about the Sex Pistols boat trip and the Jubilee was that it was a perfect anti-story to the world's media who came to cover the Jubilee. And the mediation was incredibly important. And partly punk was critical and partly punk was fascinated by the media. So it was complicated.
I know you did a fanzine with Linda, the artist Linda, and what was inspiring you at that time?
Well, I'd always liked small magazines. So I liked the Zigzag when Pete Frame edited it, and they did West Coast stuff. And then there was a man called Brian Hogg who did these things called Bambalam, which were absolutely wonderful. That was in 74, 75, and they mainly dealt with 60s. So they strayed into 70s with the Flaming Groupies. They'd have the Kinks on the cover or Creation on the cover. And so it was all that kind of hard mod stuff. And the guy, and Brian Hogg, wrote beautifully about it. That was the real inspiration. And then Sniffing Glue made the format possible. All you needed was a few pages of A4 and a photocopier, and off you go. I was very in montage. This was the start of my montage work. And I was very inspired by John Hartfield, the German artist in the Weimar period. At Compendium Books, you could get pamphlets on beach books, and there was a montage one by a man called Claude Pellier. And that was an inspiration as well. So it was just, it's a wonderful period where you could just, if you wanted to, out of nothing, you could make art. And that's what it was. And it was art as a form of communication, rather than as a form of instant communication. as opposed to being in a gallery or being theorized about. It was just praxis rather than theory, which, again, is a great moment.
I saw you did an interview with J.G. Ballard.
That was in S&D 10, yeah.
You interviewed him about his book, High Rise.
He just seemed to be very pertinent to what was going on. And I remember driving out to see him, and I had an advanced cassette of The Scream by Susie and Banshees, and it really seemed to all go together.
You're a big fan of that album?
Yes, it's great. I mean, I saw Susie a lot in 77 and 78, and I was a huge fan. Again, what was interesting to me about punk was not four-man rock and roll. So I became disinterested in the Clash in 1978, really.
Just because of that?
Well, they started getting all macho, and it was just like a boys' club, and it didn't seem interesting or new to me. What was new was different kind of sex and gender roles. So I was interested in Buzzcocks, who presented a different kind of masculinity, and Subway Sect, who also presented a different kind of masculinity. They weren't being macho. They weren't being violent. And I was also very interested in the women who were coming through. Susie, the Slits, X-Ray Specs, in particular.
I have one last question for you, and I don't know if this is something you've thought about, but do you think there will be a cultural revolution like punk again? Do you think we need that? Is that something that could happen again?
I don't know. These things are historically specific. Punk is 50 years old now. I think the problem is that punk was a product of scarcity and focus. Scarcity in actual popular culture, scarcity of, certainly in white music, of course, it was a wonderful period for black music, the 76, 75, 76. But it wasn't a great period for white music. There seemed as though there was nothing happening. So that was one thing. And now there's too much happening. And secondly, McLaren and Westwood were able to really focus something and were able to present that in a very stark form, really, to the media, who then was still able to apply a focus. There weren't that many music magazines. Hundreds of thousands of young people every week read the music press. In retrospect, it's ridiculous. You're not going to get that concentration of media again.
In your book, England is Dreaming, you trace the history of beginning of punk through Churchill, and you talk about the Mohican and the Paris riots, and then how all of that confluence of situations, it came to Jamie Reed and Malcolm McLaren messing about. In many ways, it seemed to just happen. Is that a fair assessment, or you think it was something that was coming for a while?
I think Jamie and Malcolm glamorized. It was 1968. I think they felt its pull. I think it inspired them, gave them something to work with, and they transmuted it into different forms. So I think it's valid in that respect. So it's an entirely different media landscape, and it's an entirely different situation. If I was a young person, the thing that I would be concerned about would be climate change.
Is that something that you're concerned about?
Very much so, yeah, because it affects everybody on the planet.
But is it something that you're actively trying to make a difference?
It's something I observe. I'm not involved in any organizations trying to make a change. I try to live responsibly, and it's something that I worry about a great deal. So if I was a young person, that's the difference now. I wouldn't be involved in that kind of culture. I would be involved in activism concerning climate change.
What do you think about the Just Stop Oil movement and Extinction Rebellion? Do you think they can achieve anything?
It all depends whether you think that non-violent forms of protest are going to achieve anything.
And do you?
I remain equivocal about that.
Right. All right. Well, thank you, Jon.
Okay.
Cheers.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
My name is Richard Smith, and I'm your host. I'm a filmmaker and art director, and once upon a time I was part of the big 80s. I designed record covers for Depeche Mode, I danced with Bono, discussed art with Mick Jagger, and drank tea with Susie Sue. I also grew up during those turbulent times in England in the late 70s and was driven by the do-it-yourself ethos of punk. I obsessed over bands like Joy Division and New Order and went on to work for the album cover designer Peter Saville. I believe that year, that moment in 1976, when a bunch of foul-mouthed yobs cursed and swore on national television, changed the future of culture forever.
and is what brought us to where we are today. So where do we go from here? Will emerging new technologies be the catalyst that tears down the walls of mediocrity, throwing culture and society into chaos and revolution again? We'll have to wait and see. This has been another episode of Destroy. Thank you for listening. Destroy is a Be Right Back Studios production. Learn more at BeRightBackStudios.com. And please tune in again for another episode of Destroy, the Influence of Punk podcast, wherever you listen or download. Be right back.